"Get out of my house, you old freeloader. I'm done supporting dead weight." My son Matthew screamed those words at me on Mother's Day, right there on the front porch at 2:47 p.m., while little Emma stood behind him with tear-stained cheeks and an empty stomach. I just smiled, clutching my worn leather purse, the same one I'd carried for 15 years while working double shifts to pay for his college. You know that feeling when your heart breaks but your face stays calm? When you realize the child you sacrificed everything for sees you as nothing more than a burden? I walked to my car without saying a word, but before I left, I placed a manila envelope on his kitchen counter. 24 hours later, Matthew called me 17 times. His voice was shaking when he finally reached me. "Mom, please, I didn't know. The house deed. How is your name?" But by then, I was already sitting in my lawyer's office, signing papers that would change everything. And that was just the beginning of what my ungrateful son was about to discover. Let me back up and tell you how I got to that moment, because nobody wakes up one day and decides to cut their child out of their life. This was years in the making, and I was just too blind to see it. My name is Margaret Ann Wilson. I'm 65 years old, and I've been a CPA for 42 years. I started working when Matthew was just a baby because his father, Frank, died in a car accident when Matthew was only 16. One minute, Frank was driving home from his construction job, and the next minute, a drunk driver ran a red light and took him away from us forever. I was 47 years old, had been a stay-at-home mom for 16 years, and suddenly, I was alone with a teenage boy who needed everything from college tuition to guidance about becoming a man. You want to know what real sacrifice looks like? It's working 60-hour weeks at Henderson & Associates while your son plays video games and complains that other kids have newer cars. It's eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so you can afford to buy him the name-brand clothes he needs to fit in at school. It's selling your wedding ring, the one symbol you had left of your husband, to make sure your child doesn't feel the weight of your financial struggles. I paid $68,000 for Matthew's business administration degree at State University. $68,000. Do you know how I came up with that money? I sold my car and took the bus to work for 3 years. I took out a second mortgage on our house. I worked weekends doing tax preparation for small businesses, sometimes until 2 in the morning, just to make sure my son could graduate without student loan debt hanging over his head. When Matthew graduated in 2015, I was so proud I cried during the entire ceremony. He was the first person in our family to get a college degree, and I thought all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. He got a decent job at a marketing firm, started dating a girl named Jessica, and everything seemed to be falling into place. Jessica seemed sweet enough at first. She was 23, blonde, worked as a receptionist at a dental office, and had this way of making Matthew feel like he was the most important person in the world. I should have seen the red flags then, but I was just so happy that my son was happy. Jessica had grown up with money. Her parents owned a chain of dry cleaners, and she had certain expectations about how life should look. When they got engaged in 2018, I was thrilled. I'd always dreamed of planning a wedding, helping my son start his new life. But Jessica's vision of a perfect wedding came with a price tag that made my head spin. $25,000 for one day. I'll never forget sitting at their dining table while Jessica showed me pictures of flower arrangements that cost more than I made in a month. "Mrs. Wilson," Jessica said with that sweet smile of hers, "I know it seems like a lot, but this is the most important day of our lives. We want everything to be perfect." Matthew just sat there nodding along, like spending $25,000 was the most normal thing in the world. I looked at my son, this boy I'd raised to understand the value of $1, and I didn't recognize him anymore. I ended up paying $14,000 of that wedding. $14,000 that I took out of my retirement savings because I couldn't bear the thought of my son starting his marriage with debt. I told myself it was an investment in their future, that I was helping them build a strong foundation. The wedding was beautiful, I'll give them that. Jessica looked like a princess, and Matthew looked happier than I'd ever seen him. But during the reception, I overheard Jessica talking to one of her friends about how lucky she was that Matthew's mom was so generous and how they were already planning to ask me to help with a down payment on a house. That should have been my wake-up call right there, but love makes you stupid sometimes, especially a mother's love. 6 months after the wedding, they came to me with real estate listings. They'd been looking at condos and found the perfect place for $155,000. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom unit in a nice complex with a pool and a gym. Very modern, very Jessica. "Mom," Matthew said, using that tone he'd perfected as a child when he wanted something expensive, "we can't qualify for the full mortgage on our own. We need help with the down payment." I looked at those real estate papers and saw my retirement fund disappearing. But they were just starting out, and everyone needs help sometimes, right? I convinced myself that this was what good mothers do. They help their children succeed. So I wrote a check for $62,000. $62,000 that represented 20 years of careful saving, gone in one signature. They got their condo with a small mortgage of $950 a month, which they assured me they could handle easily. For a while, things seemed fine. They invited me over for dinner occasionally, and Matthew would call me every few weeks to check in. But then Emma came along in 2020, and everything changed. Don't get me wrong, I was overjoyed to become a grandmother. Emma was this perfect little angel, with dark hair like Matthew's and bright blue eyes that lit up whenever she saw me. But Jessica had ideas about how a grandmother should fit into their lives, and those ideas involved me being available whenever they needed me, but invisible when they didn't. "Margaret," Jessica would say. She'd stopped calling me Mom, or even Mrs. Wilson by then. "We need you to watch Emma tomorrow. We have dinner plans. Not, 'Could you please watch Emma?' or 'Would you mind babysitting?' Just, 'We need you to watch Emma.' Like I was their employee instead of the woman who'd made their lifestyle possible. And I said yes, every single time, because Emma wasn't to blame for her parents' entitlement, and I wanted to be part of my granddaughter's life. So I became their free babysitter while they built their future, whatever that meant. But it wasn't just babysitting. Oh no, that would have been too simple. Jessica decided that Emma needed to attend St. Mary's Academy, a private preschool that cost $1,100 a month. $1,100 for a 3-year-old to learn the same alphabet that public school kids learn for free. "Emma needs the best start in life," Jessica explained when they asked me to take care of the tuition. "We can't afford it right now because Matthew's still building his career, but we'll pay you back when he gets promoted." The promotion never came, but the tuition bills kept arriving. Every month, $1,100 came out of my checking account so Emma could wear a cute little uniform and learn French phrases she'd forget by kindergarten. Then there was health insurance. Matthew's company offered basic coverage, but Jessica wanted the premium plan for Emma. $675 a month for a healthy child who needed nothing more than routine checkups and the occasional antibiotic for an ear infection. "We want to make sure Emma has access to the best pediatricians," Jessica said, like I was some kind of monster for questioning whether a toddler really needed concierge medical care. And still, I paid. Because what kind of grandmother puts a price tag on her granddaughter's health? But the monthly expenses didn't stop there. Somehow, despite having 2 college-educated adults living in a condo with a small mortgage, they always seemed to be short on money for basic household needs. Groceries, utilities, car payments. There was always something they couldn't quite cover. "Mom, we're just going through a rough patch," Matthew would say every time he called asking for help. "Could you spare maybe $1,800 this month? Just until things settle down." $1,800 became $1,850. $1,850 became $1,900. Before I knew it, I was transferring $1,850 every single month just for their basic living expenses. On top of the $1,100 for school and $675 for insurance. Let me do the math for you, because I'm a CPA and numbers don't lie. Every month I was paying $3,625 for my son's family to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. That's $43,500 a year, out of my salary as a senior accountant, which was decent but not unlimited. For 6 years, I wrote those checks. 6 years of watching my savings account shrink while their standard of living improved. And how did they treat the woman who was bankrolling their entire existence? Like I was the help. Jessica would call me at work and tell me, not ask, tell me, to pick up Emma from school because she had a nail appointment. She'd leave lists of groceries for me to buy when I came over to babysit. She'd rearrange my furniture when she visited my house because she didn't like how I decorated. "Margaret, this couch would look so much better against that wall," she'd say, already moving my things around like she owned the place. "And these throw pillows are really dated. I'll pick up some new ones for you next time I'm at Target." Matthew never said a word. Never told his wife that maybe she shouldn't be redecorating his mother's house. Never suggested that maybe they should be grateful instead of entitled. He just sat there scrolling through his phone while his wife turned me into a stranger in my own home. And when I tried to voice an opinion about anything, Emma's bedtime, what she should eat, whether she really needed 17 pairs of shoes, Jessica would get this look on her face like I'd insulted her personally. "Margaret, I appreciate your help. I really do. But Matthew and I are Emma's parents. We'll decide what's best for her." Then Matthew would jump in with his, "Mom, you're being a little controlling" speech that made me feel like I was some kind of interfering monster instead of the woman who was literally paying for their lives. The worst part was watching how they talked to Emma about money. This little girl was growing up thinking that everything just appeared magically. Private school, expensive clothes, toys, vacations. When Emma would ask for something, Jessica would just say, "Grandma will get it for you," like I was some kind of ATM machine that existed solely for their convenience. Emma started expecting gifts every time she saw me, not because she was spoiled necessarily, but because that's what her parents had taught her. Grandma equals money. Grandma equals stuff. It broke my heart to see my granddaughter learning that relationships were transactional, and still I kept paying, because I loved them, because I thought that's what family meant. You sacrifice for the people you love, even when it hurts, even when they take advantage, even when they start looking at you like you owe them something instead of like they should be grateful. The breaking point started building months before that Mother's Day explosion. Little things that added up to big realizations, like the time I arrived early to pick up Emma and found Jessica spending $500 on a purse at the mall while telling her friends that she couldn't afford to pay for Emma's dance classes, or the time Matthew showed up to my birthday dinner wearing a watch that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, then asked me to cover the restaurant bill because they were a little tight this month. Or the time I offered to take Emma school shopping and Jessica handed me a list of specific brand names that would have cost more than some people's monthly salary. When I suggested we could find perfectly good clothes at Target, Jessica acted like I'd suggested dressing Emma in garbage bags. "Margaret, Emma goes to St. Mary's Academy. The other children will notice if she's not dressed appropriately. We can't have her feeling self-conscious." But it was the conversation I overheard 3 weeks before Mother's Day that really opened my eyes. I'd arrived at their condo to watch Emma while they went to some work function. Jessica thought I'd left, but I'd forgotten my reading glasses and came back inside to get them. Jessica was on the phone with her sister, and she was laughing. Actually laughing while she talked about me. "Oh, Margaret is such a pushover," she was saying. "I swear, sometimes I think she likes feeling needed. She pays for everything and then acts like she's doing us some huge favor. It's kind of pathetic, honestly." I stood there in their kitchen, the kitchen in the condo I'd bought, listening to my daughter-in-law call me pathetic for supporting her family. "Matthew keeps saying we should be more grateful," Jessica continued. "But why? She chose to help us. Nobody forced her. And it's not like she has anything else to spend her money on. She's old and alone. At least this way she gets to feel useful. Old and alone. Useful. Like I was some charity case who should be grateful that they let me bankroll their lifestyle." That night, I went home and looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. I saw a 65-year-old woman who'd spent the last 6 years funding her son's family's upper-middle-class lifestyle while they treated her like hired help. I saw someone who'd confused love with enabling, support with stupidity, but I still wasn't ready to give up. I thought maybe if I talked to Matthew, if I explained how I was feeling, we could work things out. After all, he was my son, the boy I'd raised to be respectful and grateful. Surely that person was still in there somewhere. So I planned a special Mother's Day. I was going to cook his favorite meal, pot roast with all the fixings, and we were going to have a real conversation about our relationship, about boundaries and respect and what family really means. I should have known better. The day started badly when I arrived at their condo at 2 o'clock. I'd called ahead and confirmed the time, brought all the ingredients for dinner, and even picked up a small gift for Jessica since she was a mother too. But when I knocked on the door, Matthew answered, looking irritated. He was wearing that expensive watch again and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Oh, Mom, you're here. Not Happy Mother's Day, or thanks for coming, or even, hello. Just, you're here." Like I was an unwelcome surprise instead of an invited guest. Inside, Jessica was wearing an $850 dress. I recognized it from the Nordstrom catalog she'd left at my house, and she barely looked up from her phone when I walked in. "Hi, Margaret," she said, without any warmth whatsoever. "Emma's in her room. She's been cranky all day." I found my granddaughter in her bedroom, still in her pajamas at 2 in the afternoon, eating saltine crackers from a sleeve and looking miserable. "Grandma," she said, running to hug me. "I'm so hungry. Mommy said there's no food, but I looked, and there's lots of food. I just don't know how to make it." I looked around their kitchen and saw a refrigerator full of expensive organic groceries, a pantry stocked with specialty items, and a 6-year-old who was hungry because neither of her college-educated parents could be bothered to make her a sandwich. "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Daddy's watching TV, and Mommy's getting ready to go out. She said you would make me food." That's when something inside me finally snapped. Not the hungry child. That wasn't Emma's fault. Not even the fact that they'd essentially hired me to be their daughter's caretaker without pay. It was the casual assumption that of course I would handle it. Of course I would take care of what they couldn't be bothered to do themselves. I made Emma a proper lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, her favorite, and then I went to have that conversation with my son. "Matthew," I said, walking into their living room where he was sprawled on the couch watching sports. "We need to talk." He didn't even look at me. "Can it wait, Mom? The game's almost over." "No, it can't wait. I've been supporting your family for 6 years, and I think it's time we discussed some boundaries." That got his attention. He paused his show and looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Boundaries? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I pay Emma's school tuition, your health insurance, and give you almost $2,000 a month for household expenses. I'm talking about being treated like the help instead of the grandmother who's making your lifestyle possible." Jessica appeared from the bedroom, apparently having heard raised voices. She had this expression on her face that I'd seen before, the one she wore when she thought someone was being unreasonable. "Margaret, we never asked you to do all that," she said. "You offered. We've always been grateful." "Grateful?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "When was the last time either of you said thank you? When was the last time you treated me like family instead of like a bank?" That's when Matthew stood up, and I could see the anger building in his face. Not sadness or guilt or recognition of what I'd said, just anger that I dared to question their behavior. "You know what, Mom? I'm sick of this. Every time you help us, you throw it in our faces later. I paid for your college, I paid for your wedding, I bought your condo. We get it. You've done a lot, but you chose to do those things. Nobody held a gun to your head. I felt like I'd been slapped. I chose to do those things because I love you. Because I thought that's what family does. They support each other." "Support is one thing," Jessica chimed in, "but this feels more like control, like you think because you pay for things, you get to have opinions about everything." "I get to have opinions because I'm your child's grandmother and your husband's mother. That doesn't change based on how much money is involved." But Matthew was done listening. I could see it in his eyes, that stubborn look he'd had since he was 5 years old when he'd made up his mind about something. "You want to know the truth, Mom? You want to know what I really think?" I should have said no. I should have just left right then, but I needed to hear it. "I think you use money to make yourself feel important. Dad died when I was 16. And you never learned how to have a relationship with me that wasn't about what you could provide. You don't know how to just be my mother. You have to be my benefactor too." Those words hit me like a physical blow, because there was just enough truth in them to make them devastating. I had used money to show love. I had confused providing with parenting. But that didn't excuse how they'd taken advantage of it. "Maybe you're right," I said quietly. "Maybe I did use money to stay close to you. But that doesn't excuse the way you've treated me. Like I'm some obligation you have to tolerate instead of the person who's made your entire life possible." "Our life?" Jessica laughed, actually laughed. "Margaret, we have jobs, we pay our own bills, with my money supplementing everything." And that's when Matthew exploded. "Get out of my house, you old freeloader. I'm done supporting dead weight." The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a knife, but I don't think Matthew even realized what he'd said. He called me a freeloader while standing in the house I'd bought, wearing clothes I'd helped pay for, married to a woman whose lifestyle I'd been funding for 6 years. I looked at Emma, who was standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face, and I made a decision that would change everything. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because sometimes when you finally see the truth clearly, there's a weird sense of relief that comes with it. I clutched my purse, the one I'd carried through all those years of sacrifice, and I walked toward the door. But before I left, I had one more thing to do. I used my spare key for the last time and placed that manila envelope on their kitchen counter. The envelope I'd prepared 3 days earlier, when I'd finally admitted to myself that this conversation was inevitable. Inside was documentation of every single penny I'd spent on their family over the past 6 years. Bank statements, canceled checks, receipts, $176,000 in total support. $176,000 they'd taken for granted. As I drove home, I wasn't crying anymore. I was planning. Because sometimes the best way to show someone what you're worth is to show them what life looks like without you. And Matthew was about to get a very expensive education in the difference between supporting someone and being supported by them. That night, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Emma's school to cancel the tuition payments. The second was to the insurance company to remove Emma from my policy. The third was to my bank to stop all automatic transfers to Matthew's account. Then I called my lawyer and made an appointment for the next morning. It was time to update my will. After 42 years of being everyone else's safety net, Margaret Ann Wilson was finally going to learn how to put herself first. And my ungrateful son was about to discover exactly how much his old freeloader mother had really been worth. What would you do in my situation? Have you ever felt taken for granted by the people you love most? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes we all need to be reminded that love should never come at the expense of our own dignity. Monday morning came faster than I expected, and I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. You know that feeling when you've been living in a fog for so long that you forget what fresh air smells like? That's exactly where I was, finally breathing freely for the first time in 6 years. My first stop was Henderson & Associates, where I've worked as a senior CPA for the past 18 years. My colleague Janet took one look at me and knew something had changed. "Margaret, you look different today," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk with her morning coffee. "There's something in your eyes I haven't seen in a long time." "I had an awakening yesterday," I told her, pulling out the files I'd been preparing. "And now I need to do some investigating." Janet's been my closest friend at work for over a decade. She's seen me stress about Matthew's finances, heard me worry about whether I was doing enough for Emma, and watched me work overtime countless times to afford my family's lifestyle. If anyone would understand what I was about to do, it would be her. "What kind of investigating?" she asked, though I could tell from her tone she already suspected this had something to do with my son. I spread out 6 years' worth of bank statements across my desk like I was preparing someone else's tax return. Only this time, the client was my own family, and the numbers were about to tell me a story I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. "I need to know exactly how much money I've given Matthew and Jessica over the years. Not estimates, not rough calculations, exact figures." Janet whistled low as she looked at the papers. "This is a lot of documentation, Margaret. You've been keeping track of everything?" "I'm a CPA, Janet. I keep track of everything. I just never added it all up because I was afraid to know the total." We spent the next 3 hours going through every transaction. Bank transfers, check copies, credit card statements where I'd paid for their expenses. Janet helped me create a spreadsheet that would make any forensic accountant proud. The first category was direct monthly support. For 72 months, I had transferred an average of $1,850 per month for their household expenses. That alone came to $133,200. Then there were Emma's expenses. St. Mary's Academy tuition at $1,100 monthly for 36 months, $39,600. Health insurance premiums at $675 monthly for the same period, $24,300. Add in the $62,000 condo down payment, the $14,000 wedding contribution, and approximately $17,000 in miscellaneous expenses, birthday gifts, Christmas presents, emergency car repairs, vacation contributions, and about 50 other one-time requests that somehow never stopped coming. The final total made my hands shake. $289,100. $289,000 in 6 years. That was more than most people make in 5 years of full-time work, and I had essentially handed it over to 2 adults who treated me like an inconvenience. Sweet Jesus, Margaret, Janet said, staring at the spreadsheet. You could have bought a house with this money. You could have retired early. I could have done a lot of things, I said, feeling that familiar knot forming in my stomach. But I thought I was investing in my family's future. What are you going to do with this information? That was the question, wasn't it? I had concrete proof of what I'd suspected, but never wanted to acknowledge. Matthew and Jessica had been living off my generosity while treating me like hired help. But knowing the problem and solving it were two different things. First, I'm going to stop all payments immediately. Then I'm going to make some changes to my estate planning. And then, I paused, looking at all those numbers. Then I'm going to give them a chance to show me who they really are when the money stops flowing. Janet nodded approvingly. It's about time. You've been enabling them for years, honey. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. That afternoon, I made the calls I'd been putting off. The first was to St. Mary's Academy. This is Margaret Wilson, I told the billing department. I need to remove my granddaughter, Emma Patterson, from my account effective immediately. Of course, Mrs. Wilson. Will the parents be taking over the payments? That's between them and the school. I'm no longer responsible for the tuition. The woman on the phone was clearly confused. In 6 years of paying Emma's tuition, I had never missed a payment or been late. The idea that I would suddenly stop must have seemed impossible. Mrs. Wilson, if there's a financial hardship, we do have payment plans available. There's no financial hardship. This is a personal decision. Please send all future billing to Matthew and Jessica Patterson directly. The next call was to the insurance company. Removing Emma from my policy was more complicated, but I had the right to cancel coverage I was paying for. The representative tried to convince me to keep the policy active, but I was firm. The child's parents are both employed adults. They can secure their own insurance coverage. The final call was to my bank to stop all automatic transfers to Matthew's account. This one felt the most definitive, like I was cutting an umbilical cord that should have been cut years ago. Mrs. Wilson, you've had this automatic transfer set up since 2018. Are you sure you want to cancel it? I'm absolutely certain, and I want all future transfer attempts to be declined, even if someone calls pretending to be authorized. With those calls completed, I felt lighter than I had in years, but I wasn't done. There was still one more person I needed to talk to, someone who might give me insight into what Matthew and Jessica really thought about our arrangement. Teresa Gonzalez has been my neighbor for 12 years. She's a sweet woman in her 50s who works as a nurse at the local hospital, and she's always been friendly with my whole family. More importantly, she's the type of person people confide in without thinking about the consequences. I knocked on her door Tuesday evening with a bottle of wine and a heavy heart. Margaret, what a nice surprise. Come in, come in. Teresa's living room always smells like vanilla candles and coffee, and it's one of those spaces that makes you want to tell the truth, even when the truth is ugly. Teresa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She settled into her favorite armchair and looked at me with the kind of attention that nurses give to patients who are about to deliver bad news. Of course, honey. What's going on? Has Jessica ever talked to you about me? About our family situation? Teresa's face changed immediately. I could see her trying to decide how much to tell me, which meant there was definitely something to tell. Margaret, I don't like to repeat conversations. Please, I need to know. She sighed deeply and poured herself a larger glass of wine than she'd originally planned. Last month, Jessica and I ran into each other at Target. She was buying some expensive home decor items, and she mentioned that you'd given her money for Emma's school clothes. What exactly did she say? She said. Teresa paused, clearly uncomfortable. She said you were a little too generous for your own good, and that sometimes she felt guilty taking money from someone who was so desperate to feel needed. Those words hit me like a physical blow. Desperate to feel needed. Is that what my love looked like from the outside? Is that how my own daughter-in-law saw my sacrifices? There's more, isn't there? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. She mentioned that Matthew sometimes complained about how you used money to control the relationship. She said they'd discussed setting boundaries, but hadn't figured out how to do it without hurting your feelings. I sat there absorbing this information. They'd been talking about me behind my back, analyzing my motivations, treating my generosity like a burden they had to manage rather than a gift they should appreciate. Did she say anything else? Teresa looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. She laughed about how you always seemed surprised when they didn't invite you to things, like you expected constant gratitude or inclusion because you helped them financially. The picture was becoming crystal clear. In their minds, I wasn't a loving mother and grandmother who wanted to help. I was a controlling older woman who used money to manipulate their lives. Every gift I'd given, every bill I'd paid, every sacrifice I'd made had been reframed as manipulation instead of love. "Thank you for being honest with me," I told Teresa. "I know that wasn't easy. Margaret, for what it's worth, I think they're wrong. You've been incredibly generous, and they should be grateful instead of critical." I drove home that night with a strange mixture of heartbreak and relief. Heartbreak because the family I'd thought I was building had never really existed. Relief because I finally understood that this wasn't about my failure to love them correctly. It was about their failure to appreciate what they'd been given. Wednesday morning, I called my attorney, Robert Chen, and scheduled an appointment for Friday afternoon. Robert has been handling my legal affairs for 15 years, ever since Frank died, and I needed help navigating all the paperwork that comes with sudden widowhood. "Margaret, good to hear from you. What can I help you with?" "I need to update my will and make some changes to my estate planning." "Of course. Are there specific changes you have in mind?" "I want to remove my son as the primary beneficiary and establish a trust for my granddaughter instead." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Robert had helped me set up the original will that left everything to Matthew, and he knew how much my son meant to me. "This is a significant change, Margaret. Has something happened?" "Yes, something has happened. I've realized that leaving my estate to Matthew would be a disservice to everyone involved, including him." Friday afternoon, I sat in Robert's office with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. His law firm occupies the top floor of a downtown building, and his conference room has windows that look out over the entire city. I'd always found the view comforting, but today it felt symbolic, like I was finally seeing everything from a higher perspective. "Let me make sure I understand what you're proposing," Robert said, reviewing the notes he'd taken. "You want to establish a trust for Emma that she can't access until she's 26, with you controlling the distribution until then?" "That's correct. The trust should be funded with 70% of my estate, which is currently valued at approximately $395,000. And the remaining 30%? Split between 3 charities: the local food bank, a scholarship fund for single mothers, and the Children's Hospital." Robert made additional notes, then looked up at me with the kind of expression lawyers wear when they think their client might be making an emotional decision. "Margaret, this effectively removes Matthew from inheriting anything substantial. Are you certain this is what you want?" "I'm absolutely certain. Matthew has shown me that he believes he's entitled to my support without offering anything in return. Leaving him my estate would just enable more of the same behavior." "What about Emma? She's only 6 years old." "Emma is innocent in all of this. The trust will ensure she has money for college and a good start in life, but she won't be able to access it until she's old enough to understand its value. And I'll maintain control over distributions while I'm alive, which means I can still help with legitimate needs." Robert spent the next hour drafting the changes, and I signed everything with a hand that didn't shake once. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what was right instead of what would keep everyone happy. But I still had one more piece of evidence to gather before I was ready for the conversation that would change everything. Saturday morning, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to Matthew and Jessica's condo unannounced. Not to babysit Emma or bring groceries or handle some emergency. I wanted to see how they were living when they didn't know I was watching. I parked across the street and waited. At 11:30 a.m., Jessica emerged wearing an outfit that probably cost more than some people's monthly car payment. She got into her BMW, the one with payments I'd been helping cover as part of their household expenses, and drove toward the upscale shopping district. An hour later, Matthew left wearing expensive athletic wear and carrying a gym bag. His destination appeared to be the country club where he'd mentioned having a membership that costs $250 per month. I sat in my car for a moment, processing what I'd just witnessed. Here were 2 adults who claimed they could barely afford their basic expenses, spending their Saturday morning on luxury activities, while their 6-year-old daughter was presumably inside with a babysitter they were paying by the hour. That's when I realized I had enough information to confirm what I'd suspected all along. They weren't struggling to make ends meet. They were struggling to maintain a lifestyle that required my subsidies to function. Without my monthly contributions, they wouldn't be poor. They'd just have to live within their actual means. The difference was significant. Poor people can't afford their necessities. Matthew and Jessica couldn't afford their luxuries without my help, but they'd convinced themselves, and me, that their luxuries were necessities. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not an email or a text message, but an actual letter on paper with a pen. It felt important to put my thoughts into something physical, something that couldn't be deleted or ignored. Dear Matthew and Jessica, I began, by the time you read this, you will have discovered that certain financial arrangements we've had are no longer in effect. I spent 2 hours crafting that letter, choosing each word carefully. I wanted to be clear without being cruel, firm without being vindictive. I explained exactly how much I'd spent on their family over the past 6 years. I detailed the specific changes I'd made to my will and why, and I offered them one chance to rebuild our relationship on more equal terms. The letter ended with this: I love you both, and I love Emma more than my own life, but love cannot continue to flow in only one direction. If you're interested in rebuilding our relationship based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence, I'm willing to have that conversation. If not, I understand, and I wish you well. Sunday evening, I prepared 3 envelopes. The first contained the bank statements and financial documentation Janet had helped me compile. The second contained copies of all the cancellation notices I'd sent to Emma's school and insurance company. The third contained my letter and a copy of my updated will. I also included one additional item in the third envelope, a cashier's check for $5,000 made out to Emma Patterson, with a note explaining that this was her grandmother's Christmas and birthday gifts for the next 3 years, assuming her parents would allow me to maintain a relationship with her. Monday morning, I drove to their condo for what I knew might be the last time. I used my spare key to enter, something I'd done hundreds of times over the years, and placed all 3 envelopes on their granite kitchen counter, the same counter where I'd left countless groceries and prepared countless meals for a family that had started taking my presence for granted. Then I left my spare key on top of the envelopes and walked away. The phone started ringing at 2:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I was in a meeting with a client, and I'd turned off my phone after the 3rd missed call from Matthew's number. By the time my meeting ended at 4:30, I had 17 missed calls and 12 text messages. The progression of those messages told me everything I needed to know about how my son really felt about our relationship. The first message was angry. "Mom, what the hell is this? You can't just stop paying for everything without warning." The 5th message was desperate. "Please call me back. We need to talk about this." The 10th message was bargaining. "I know we haven't been perfect, but we can work this out. Emma needs stability." The 12th and final message was resigned. "I looked at the will copy. I understand you're serious. Can we please just talk?" I waited until 7 p.m. to call him back, and when I did, his voice was shaking so badly he could barely speak. "Mom, please. I didn't know about the house deed. How is your name on everything? I thought we owned the condo." "You do own the condo, Matthew. You also own the mortgage payments, the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, and all the maintenance costs that I've been covering as part of your monthly allowance." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "The will. Mom, you can't be serious about this." "I'm completely serious. I've spent $289,000 supporting your family over the past 6 years, and yesterday you called me a freeloader. I think it's time you learn to appreciate what you have instead of expecting more." "But Emma? What about Emma's school? Emma is 6 years old. She can learn just as much in public school as she can at St. Mary's Academy, and her parents, her college-educated parents with full-time jobs, can figure out how to provide for her needs. Mom, you can't afford the lifestyle I've been subsidizing. There's a difference." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but it was clear that Matthew still didn't understand. He kept talking about what they needed and how I was punishing Emma and how unfair it was for me to change the rules without warning. What he didn't talk about was gratitude. He didn't apologize for calling me a freeloader. He didn't acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, he and Jessica had been taking advantage of my generosity. He just wanted to negotiate a way back to the status quo where I paid for everything and they treated me like an obligation. That's when I knew I'd made the right decision. "Matthew," I said, interrupting his third explanation of why Emma needed private school. I want you to think very carefully about something. What? In this entire conversation, you haven't once said thank you for the 6 years of support I've provided. You haven't apologized for the way you and Jessica have treated me. You've only focused on what you're losing and why that's unfair to you. Mom, No, let me finish. Tomorrow, you and Jessica are going to wake up and figure out how to live on your actual income instead of your income plus my subsidies. You're going to discover whether your marriage can survive without using me as your safety net. And you're going to learn what it feels like to be responsible for your own lives. What if we can't manage? Then you'll figure it out. Just like I figured out how to raise you by myself after your father died. Just like millions of other families figure out how to live within their means every single day. I hung up that night, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Proud of myself. Proud for finally standing up for my own dignity. Proud for teaching my son a lesson that was 20 years overdue. And proud for ensuring that Emma would inherit something more valuable than money. She'd inherit the knowledge that her grandmother valued herself enough to demand respect. But I also felt scared. Scared that I'd lost my son forever. Scared that I'd never see Emma again. Scared that I'd spent 6 years building a family that was really just an elaborate financial transaction. As I got ready for bed that night, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw something different. Not an old woman who was desperate to feel needed, but a 65-year-old woman who'd finally learned the difference between loving someone and enabling them. Tomorrow would bring consequences. For Matthew and Jessica, who would have to face their real financial situation for the first time in 6 years. For Emma, whose life was about to change in ways she wouldn't understand. And for me, who would discover whether my family loved Margaret Wilson or just loved Margaret Wilson's checkbook. But tonight, for the first time in years, I went to sleep knowing I'd done the right thing. What would you have done in my situation? Do you think I was too harsh, or should I have cut them off sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes we all need to hear that it's okay to put our own dignity first, even when it means disappointing the people we love most. 3 days passed in complete silence. 3 days where my phone didn't ring once, where no one knocked on my door asking for money or favors or babysitting. 3 days where I got to remember what my life felt like when it belonged entirely to me. I won't lie, those days were harder than I expected. For 6 years, my schedule had revolved around Emma's needs and Matthew's requests. Suddenly, I had entire evenings with nothing to do except read books and watch movies I actually wanted to see. It should have felt liberating, but mostly it felt lonely. On Thursday morning, everything changed. I was getting ready for work when my doorbell rang at 7:15 a.m. Through the peephole, I could see Jessica standing on my front porch, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, she wasn't wearing any makeup, and she was clutching a stack of papers against her chest like they might fly away if she let go. I almost didn't answer the door. Part of me wanted to let her stand there and think about what desperation felt like. The same way I'd stood on their porch last Sunday, feeling desperate for basic respect. But curiosity won out. "Jessica," I said, opening the door just wide enough to see her face. "This is a surprise. Margaret, please, I need to talk to you." Her voice was shaky, and I could see she'd been crying. "Can I come in? Just for a few minutes?" I hesitated. This woman had spent 6 years treating me like hired help, calling me pathetic behind my back, and acting like my generosity was some kind of burden she had to tolerate. But she was also Emma's mother, and despite everything, I still cared about my granddaughter's well-being. 5 minutes, I said, stepping aside to let her in. Jessica sat on the edge of my couch like she was afraid to get too comfortable. She spread the papers she'd been holding across my coffee table, and I could see they were bills, lots of bills. "Margaret, I know you're angry with us. I know we haven't been grateful enough. But please, you have to understand what you've done." "What I've done." The words came out sharper than I intended. "What I've done is stop enabling 2 adults who should be capable of supporting themselves." "We can't afford Emma's school," Jessica said, her voice cracking. "They want the full semester payment up front, and we don't have $11,000 just sitting around. Then Emma will go to public school. Millions of children get excellent educations in public school. You don't understand. The other kids at St. Mary's, their families have money. Emma has friends there. She's supposed to start first grade with her class. I looked at this woman who was falling apart over the idea that her 6-year-old might have to attend the same public school that had educated generations of successful people, and I felt a mixture of sympathy and frustration. Jessica, Emma will make new friends. She'll adjust. Children are remarkably resilient. But the health insurance. Jessica shuffled through the papers until she found what she was looking for. The plan through Matthew's work has a $5,000 deductible. What if Emma gets sick? What if something happens? Then you'll handle it the same way millions of other families handle unexpected medical expenses. You'll work out a payment plan with the hospital, or you'll apply for financial assistance, or you'll figure out another solution. Jessica stared at me like I'd suggested she perform surgery on Emma herself. Margaret, you don't understand. We're not like other families. We have certain standards. And there it was. The truth that Jessica probably didn't even realize she'd just spoken. They weren't worried about Emma's actual well-being. They were worried about maintaining an image that required my financial support to sustain. What standards are those, Jessica? We can't have Emma thinking we're poor. We can't have her going to school with kids from... She paused, clearly realizing how she sounded. Kids from what? Working families? Families where the parents actually support themselves? Jessica's face flushed red. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. You've gotten so accustomed to living above your means that you've forgotten what your actual means are. I stood up, signaling that our 5 minutes were over. But Jessica wasn't finished. The mortgage, she said desperately. We can't make the mortgage payment without your help. We'll lose the condo. No, you won't. You'll figure out how to budget properly, or you'll refinance, or you'll move somewhere less expensive. You have options. You just don't like any of them. You're really going to let your granddaughter become homeless? I turned around slowly and looked at this woman who was trying to manipulate me using my love for Emma. Jessica, you and Matthew both have college degrees and full-time jobs. Your household income is approximately $85,000 per year. The median household income in this country is $68,000. You are not becoming homeless. You're just going to have to live like the majority of American families live. But Emma will be fine. What won't be fine is Emma growing up thinking that money appears magically whenever you need it, or that relationships are based on what one person can provide for another. Jessica sat there for a moment, staring at the bills spread across my coffee table. When she looked up at me again, I could see something different in her eyes. Not desperation anymore, but anger. You know what your problem is, Margaret. You're bitter because your husband died and you never had the life you wanted. So you use money to control other people's lives because it's the only way you can feel important. Those words were designed to hurt me, and they did. But they also revealed exactly who Jessica really was when she couldn't get what she wanted. You're right about one thing, I said calmly. Frank's death changed the trajectory of my entire life. I never got to be just a mother. I had to be a father too, and a provider and a protector. I worked 60-hour weeks for 20 years to give Matthew opportunities I never had. I walked to my front door and opened it. But here's what you don't understand, Jessica. I didn't do those things to control anyone. I did them because that's what love looks like. Real love requires sacrifice, but real love also requires gratitude and respect. 2 things you and Matthew have never shown me. Jessica gathered her papers and stood up, but she wasn't finished trying to hurt me. Emma's going to hate you for this. When she's older and she finds out her grandmother could have helped but chose not to, she's going to hate you. Maybe, I said, but at least she'll know her grandmother had enough self-respect to demand basic human decency from the people she loved. Jessica left without another word, and I watched her drive away in the BMW I'd been helping pay for. I felt sad, but I also felt proud. Proud that I hadn't given in to the manipulation. Proud that I'd stood up for myself even when it was hard. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. That evening, Matthew showed up at my door. Not angry like Jessica had been, but broken. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week, and when I opened the door, he just stood there staring at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we please talk?" I let him in, and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework for years, where we'd eaten countless dinners together, where I'd told him about his father's death 18 years ago. "I read your letter," he said, "all of it, multiple times, and I'm starting to understand what Jessica and I have become." I waited. This was his conversation to have. "I never thought of myself as entitled," Matthew continued. "I always thought we were just close, that families help each other. But looking at those bank statements, seeing how much you've given us over the years, he shook his head. We've been living off you, haven't we? It was the first time in 6 years that Matthew had acknowledged the reality of our financial relationship. Yes, I said simply. You have. And we've been treating you like… He struggled to find the words. Like you owed us something instead of like you were doing us a favor. Yes, you have. Matthew put his head in his hands. How did I become this person, Mom? You raised me better than this. You became this person gradually over time because I enabled it. Every time you asked for help, and I said yes without question, I was teaching you that my support was unlimited and unconditional. But I should have known better. I should have been grateful. Yes, you should have. But Matthew, this isn't just about money. It's about respect. It's about treating me like family instead of like a service provider. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Matthew asked the question I'd been waiting for. What happens now? With us, I mean. That depends on you, on whether you want to have a relationship with me that isn't based on what I can provide financially. I do. I really do. But I don't know how to fix this. You start by taking responsibility for your own life. You and Jessica figure out how to live on your actual income. You stop asking me for money for anything except true emergencies. And by emergencies, I mean medical crises or job loss, not, we want to take a vacation but can't afford it. Matthew nodded. What about Emma? What about her? I know you love her. I know this isn't about punishing her. You're right, it's not. Emma is welcome in my home anytime you want to bring her here, but I won't be providing free babysitting while you and Jessica go out to dinner or to the gym. And I won't be paying for her private school or extra activities unless they're things I want to give her as gifts from her grandmother. That seems fair, Matthew said, though I could tell it was hard for him to accept that his free childcare was over. There's something else, I continued. I've changed my will. Emma will inherit 70% of my estate, but it will be held in trust until she's 26. She'll have access to funds for education and other legitimate needs, but she won't be able to just inherit a lump sum at 18 and make poor decisions with it. Matthew's face went white. And the other 30%? Charity. Organizations that help people who actually need help, not people who want help maintaining lifestyles they can't afford. So I inherit nothing. That's correct. You've already inherited more from me while I'm alive than most children ever receive from their parents. I think that's enough. Matthew sat with this information for a long time. I could see him processing not just the financial implications, but what this meant about how I viewed his character and choices. I understand, he said finally. I don't like it, but I understand it. Matthew, this isn't meant to be punishment. It's meant to be education. You need to learn to be proud of what you can accomplish on your own instead of being proud of what I can accomplish for you. What if we can't make it? What if we lose the condo? Then you'll find a smaller place you can afford. You'll learn to budget and prioritize and make sacrifices like everyone else does. And what if Jessica leaves me? That question hung in the air between us. It was the one I'd been wondering about myself, whether Matthew and Jessica's marriage could survive without my financial support to smooth over their problems. I don't know, I said honestly. But if she does, it won't be because you can't provide for her anymore. It will be because your relationship was built on a foundation that was never real. Matthew started crying then. Not angry tears or manipulative tears, but the kind of tears that come when you realize you've been living a lie without knowing it. I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared that I don't know how to be a real adult. I'm scared that I've been coasting on your support for so long that I don't know how to actually take care of my family. Being scared is good, I told him. Fear motivates people to work harder and smarter. You're 32 years old, Matthew. You have a college degree, work experience, and a brain that functions perfectly well when you choose to use it. You can figure this out. Will you help me? Not with money, but with guidance? It was the first time in years that Matthew had asked for something from me that wasn't financial. Of course I will, but only if